Hey everyone, welcome to yet another video of me waffling inanely about what's happening with my Lamborghini Gallardo. And in this video, I'm going to talk about replacing the clutch. And in short, I'm going to go through the cost of replacement and the issues that arise in relation to the clutch and how to avoid some of those. Now, I've had this Gallardo for, we're talking about 6 months, but I bought it secondhand. So clearly it had some clutch wear on it before I bought it. And I recently replaced the clutch. And by recently, I mean a month ago. I only just got around to actually making a video on it, which shows how lazy and how much inertia there is in this. In any case, I replaced the clutch. And I'll go through the cost associated with that in just a second. Like I said, I've had it for about 6-ish months. I haven't really had any other problems with it. I've replaced some brake pads, which is not really a big deal, and that's pretty much it. I had to deal with some spark plug type things when I bought it, some coils, sorry, just because it had been sitting for a while, but otherwise it's been fine. Okay, so onto the clutch. Well, what exactly happened with this clutch? Well, I realized that there was something wrong when the car really would not go into reverse. It would shift forward, but would only shift into reverse when it was in sport mode. That tells you there's probably an e-gear or a clutch issue. The reason for that is when it's in sports mode, it is easier for it to shift. And by easier, I'm meaning that in a non-technical sense, i.e. it is effectively easier for the clutch to grab between gears. So hence why it can shift in sport mode, but not in normal mode. And when it would shift in any case, it made a clunky sound. So I was having more and more difficulty shifting into reverse mode. Going forward, it was actually pretty okay. Nothing particularly untoward was happening there. So after this deteriorated a little bit, I finally took it along to my mechanic, which is European Galleria in Sydney. They're really good if you're looking for anything to be done. So I took it along there, and then they diagnosed the problem, which unsurprisingly was a clutch issue. This became patently obvious on the drive there, where there was kind of some smoky type smell coming from the general engine area. Now that, it turns out, was just the clutch, because the plates in the clutch were kind of grinding against one another, but that was not particularly pleasant. And it was exacerbated by me needing to reverse down a hill at one point. So that's basically what happened. I took it to the mechanic. They diagnosed the issue as being a clutch related issue, which is not terribly surprising. The whole clutch needed to be replaced. So, how much then does the clutch cost to replace? Well, for me, it cost about just under 10,000 Australian. So we're talking about 7,500 US, give or take a little bit, depends on the exchange rate at the time. So we're talking about 10,000 Australian, including labor to get that done. So it is a big job to replace the clutch, and the clutch is not itself that cheap. So that's a relatively standard price. I'd regard the price I paid as being on the low end. Maybe because mine was in better condition than some other cars, I feel like they charged me less than what you might expect to pay in many circumstances. Because I was anticipating it being close toward 12,000 Australian, maybe a little bit more. And we're talking, I've heard stories about 10,000 US to get this type of thing done. So that's how much it cost me. Now, in terms of the clutch and the replacement thereof, well, I'm not an engineer, sorry. I am a financial engineer. So I know about the financing, but not so much about the actual engineering. But it turns out the clutch was in a rather parlous state, where it was effectively having plates of metal scrape against one another. This was creating a bit of a burning smell, for one, and two, it was causing problems shifting, because the plates would just glide over one another, rather than actually shifting and grabbing properly. So hence why we were ending up with this problem, which obviously needed to be resolved. So that's basically what happened. Disassembling the clutch is interesting in that when you take it apart, it looks kind of fun and enjoyable and artistic, but I really don't know what any of these parts do. I mean, it could be rearranged into a clock, or maybe one could redesign it as some form of industrial art, but that's another issue entirely. Basically, I replaced the clutch. So the question is then, how do you stop this thing occurring? So that is easier said than done, but there's a few things you might want to do to stop the clutch deteriorating. Firstly, try to avoid reversing up hills because that is terrible for the clutch. Oftentimes, the car will really decompensate when you're doing this, so avoid reversing up hills. Secondly, avoid launching. Now, I've never launched this car, but the prior owner, I believe, might have done so. And that's judging from the wear on the brakes as well. So always avoid launching, because launching is terrible for the clutch. So it is best to avoid launching if at all possible. And in particular, avoid launching consecutively if you are going to launch. Oftentimes, if you're driving in the city, you won't need to launch anyway, so I mean, it really isn't that much of an issue to avoid it. Generally, launching is terrible for cars, unless it's like a Porsche where they seem to be very good at it. So in any case, don't launch the car. Next, you hear people talk about driving in manual mode rather than using the e-gear. My car's an e-gear. I mean, I don't think that makes that much difference, to be honest, particularly with LPs. Like, I'm an LP 570, the e-gear's gotten a lot better. That doesn't seem to be the main driver, from what I can gather, having spoken to mechanics. Thirdly, in addition to that type of thing, you're going to want to drive it in sport. So you'll want to drive it in sport mode in order to ensure faster shifts, which then is going to put less damage and less wear onto the clutch, because the shift is occurring faster, so there's less friction occurring in relation to the clutch, and therefore you're going to get less clutch wear. So I always drive mine in sport. I have no idea why you would drive a Lamborghini in normal mode. I don't even know why it has a normal mode. Like, the car seems to really hate being in normal mode. Like, I'll put it into normal mode and it sounds like it is decompensating. Like, it sounds like it hates being in normal mode. So sport mode is definitely what I'd go into instead of going in normal mode. So that would be another tip I'd have here. So basically, don't drive up hills, don't launch the car, put it into sport mode. I think the e-gear is probably okay, particularly with LP models. I'm not sure that the trick of putting it into neutral as you're approaching traffic lights really does anything, but I mean, others are going to correct me on that, I'm sure. But in any case, that's pretty much my tips for trying to avoid too much clutch wear. And patently there was some clutch wear on this before I got the car, possibly from some aggressive driving from the prior owner. Now, I'll also note here that driving the car and driving it reasonably hard is not necessarily bad for the car. The car is designed to be robust. They are pretty reliable, so I wouldn't be too concerned. The next issue then comes on to what is the cost of ownership of a car like this. Now, overall, the most expensive thing I've had is the clutch, at about that 10,000 AUD. That's pretty much the most expensive thing you'll have to get done to this car. And after you've replaced the clutch, you generally don't need to replace it again, which basically tells you that it really isn't that expensive. If you're factoring in $10,000 over, say, 5 years course of ownership, plus some other miscellaneous things, that really isn't any worse than like a reasonably modern Mercedes or Audi. Like, let's face it, these costs aren't that much worse than any number of other modern cars where you need to replace things. So I regard this as not terrible cost of ownership. My overall cost, and I haven't done the full arithmetic, but my overall cost is that $10,000 for the clutch, about another $1,500 for the coils and registration inspection. I think it was another $750 for some brake pads. And that's pretty much it. I haven't had to do anything else. It has otherwise been super reliable. And even when the clutch was going, it was reliable enough. It's just that it was patently obvious that it wasn't shifting. Okay, so that's pretty much an update on my Gallardo, some issues with the clutch, and basically the cost of replacing that clutch, and some strategies to try to avoid excess clutch wear so you don't have to replace it yourself, or at least you can delay it as much as possible. Now, thanks a lot for listening in and listening to me drone on. I hope the video has been useful to you. If there's anything else you think would be a useful strategy in relation to clutches, let me know that in the comments below. And otherwise, it would be brilliant if you like the video and subscribe to the channel. And I hope to see you for future videos as well. Bye.